Testing, testing. I see a nice live button, which I'm hoping means that we are actually live for the Hit Games conference today. I'm hoping and assuming that if we're not, something's going to pop up and ping at me to tell me that something's gone wrong. We all work in tech. We all know that tech issues are a thing. So I hope if anything happens today, you will bear with us. But hello and welcome to the second day actually, but the first session of the second day of the Hit Games conference. I'm Lauren Wade. I'm from Calibri Games in Berlin, and I'll be moderating for you today. So quite simply means I'll be introducing your sessions and asking some questions at the end, which I hope you will be sending in the chat or jumping in to ask. Our first speaker today is, of course, Teemu, who is here from Metaplay, and we're going to be hearing about building for scale, how not to get caught out at global launch. So Teemu, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Lauren, and good morning, everyone, or at least morning in Finland time. Let's talk about making big games. And I just want to obviously start with the obvious of who am I? Why am I here? Why am I talking about this? Before we jump into the meat of things. So, Teemu, very nice to meet you. I'm co-founder and chief product officer at Metaplay. And my career is in game development. So it's maybe my 15th year in the industry or so at this point. I was also co-founder at a studio called PlayRaven, acquired by Rovio some 5 years ago. I was a game lead at Vuga in Berlin, incidentally. And I've been spending a long time, basically my whole career, in free-to-play games, mostly on mobile. So here's some of the titles that I've worked on that I'm allowed to talk about, in mostly as a game designer, game lead, and so on. But that's not what I do today. On my after hours, I got a lifetime award from my GDA Finland for doing things like hosting the Games Leadership Conference in Helsinki and so on. And indeed, Metaplay, we are a technology company. We do basically the tools and tech that powers mobile free-to-play games. I got super frustrated at the lack of tools in my previous games companies, and this is how we're fixing it. And for today's talk, while the games experience is relevant, I'm mostly talking about things we've learned while building Metaplay over the past 4.5 years or so. And let's, right now, you and me, us together, let's talk about making a new game, something that we want to aim for the top crossing charts. I'll use mobile as an example, but this is a little bit more generic, so bear with me. So if we're about to put a team together, raise some money, usually nowadays, or over the past 10 years really, the main playbook has always been about let's optimize our time to market as a team. But that's the single best way for us to, frankly speaking, cut the shit of big company politics. But on the other hand, figure out that what we're doing makes sense, find an audience and build for them and validate our ideas and then really start investing. And this dynamic has become more strong recently, where to succeed, especially in mobile free-to-play, you really need that data because obvious points. Let me just count the ways briefly. Number one, there's basically no platform discovery at all from Google, from Apple, even Steam, really. So you as a developer, or we as a team, we need to solve our own marketing. And to do that in mass market games, the only really scalable way of doing that is through performance marketing and ads, essentially. And those ads are sold in an auction house, right? So to be able to pay for ads or show ads, we need to be able to pay more than whoever else happens to be advertising at the same time for similar ads, which at this day and age of no targeting is pretty much all of them. And as a final point, other people have quite a lot of money and they're very comfortable spending a lot of money on their ads because they know how much money their games are making. We don't. Our game doesn't exist yet. So we need to get to a very high confidence of our game being profitable so that we're able to outbid other people on ads. And that basically is a live or die for our game. So no news here, but this is really important because if as a new team, this is our biggest sort of fear that we need to overcome, then that affects our decision making, obviously. Usually it means that our goal as a team should be to find, prove a hit game that's worth investing in. right? And that generally means that we have two priorities as a company. First one, we really need to get to data. So we'll focus on maybe the core indicative gameplay loop. We need to get it to soft launch, and we need to have some amount of analytics in our game. Those are sort of the must-haves. We can't really negotiate about them. So, let's focus on that as a goal. And then while we're doing it, let's do it as quickly, as cheaply as humanly possible, because, new team. So the less money we have to raise, the better. Or the easier we can do it, then the more likely it is that we get the permission as a team inside a bigger company to go on this venture. So generally, it means things like, regardless of the game that we're doing, we really want to iterate on it as quickly as possible, technically speaking. We want to focus on the above 3 points, and we kind of want to use off-the-shelf tools and so on to cut as many corners as possible. Now, all of this is completely reasonable, and it's a really good plan. It works. And of course, herein lies the problem of today, the title of the thing, how not to get caught out of global launch. Because if, as a company, as we should, if we're optimizing for this development stage and like hyper optimizing ourselves to be as good as we possibly could be on shipping quickly, improving ideas and killing them fast, and not really worrying about the rest, then it's not deterministic, but it's very likely that normal, smart, reasonable people will end up completely destroying the productivity the moment you hit global launch, because a number of things happen. And maybe you've shared this experience, at least I have, where you're a bunch of smart people, you go to global launch, or replace global launch with your version of, now we're dealing with live players and real production data, and we're like in advanced soft launch stages or what have you, and suddenly features that used to take weeks to do from the team suddenly take months to do from the team. No estimates, like hold water, people are kind of fighting fires, running left and right all the time, endless meetings about different status checks that don't really actually lead to sort of business metrics increases. And then you might be spending half a year, 1 year, even 2 years in this sort of mode of working, trying to maybe hire up more people, but then the organization starts ballooning, and it's a sort of a chaotic time in life. It's a very common experience to have. And again, actually, one of the leading causes of this is that the organization, or us as a team, we weren't aiming to be amazing at live games. We were aiming to be amazing at making a game in the first place, which is different. So now, describing the problem, but it's not all doom and gloom. We can break this down a little bit. So there's sort of 4 major points, I think, that happen around this global launch time. Your number of players obviously shoots up quite a lot, especially if the game goes viral or it's like an early hit game, up to millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, maybe even. The complexity of your game starts skyrocketing, because you're no longer, after global launch, aiming for a small, neat product, but you're aiming to be competitive with your neighbors. Because again, we need to outbid all of our neighbors for ad space, which means we need to make money, which means we probably want to have features in the game that make it more fun, a better business case for us long term, so that people enjoy spending more money in the game. That generally means complex features, live ops, all that. So complexity is shooting up at the same time as, because of the 2 points, you're probably hiring into your team, live ops managers, probably have separate feature teams in a bigger game, probably have a content pipeline that you need to maintain, so on. And finally, you're obviously dealing with a live business at this point. You have revenue coming in, you have paying customers. With that, you have sort of expectations within the organization and expectations from the customers, things like customer support and so on. All of these things hit at the same time. And honestly, I could spend an hour talking about each one of them individually. But let's just kind of glance over maybe the first 2 from a technical point of view, because again, that's where I have the most experience. So first sort of truism statement is that not all tech necessarily scales as you might expect. So that the experiences that you had during development, when you were hyper optimized into the fastest, smallest, most beautiful thing that keeps your game alive, and I'm obviously now assuming that all sort of top grossing oriented free to play games, they tend to be multiplayer or social by nature. They need to have purchase validation and all that. They need a backend component. That's a given. So what I have here on the slide is a very small version of what one might reasonably build over a weekend to start prototyping games. You run your game logic somewhere, you've got a database, you connect the services, you have your analytics because we need those, and Bob's your uncle. It's great, it works, and it does. But then once you hit 10 million players onto it, it's no longer a linear experience. For example, it's very common to build something like this out of, say, serverless cloud functions and so on, which is sort of a popular web technology for making scalable services. Well, turns out that that's an amazing tool for making great websites. It's got such a big community and a lot of documentation around these technologies, but they sort of don't really work well for game workloads. Games are different than websites, and this nuance is often missed. So, for example, the database is the most expensive part of your backend, and it's the most difficult thing to scale after the fact. So you might be hammering your database to death with a lot of players, and this is only something you realize after scale comes in. And this is okay, like this happens, and smart people are able to fix these things. The problem obviously is that now you're fixing and managing a situation rather than growing the game, rather than scaling the game, right? So of course we're smart. So let's just like sit down, have a cup of coffee, and think about what do we actually need, because at the same time, remember the game complexity, that's now going up. So if on the, I sort of like to divide this into three parts, where first one is the pre-launch, which is where we want to be as fast as possible. We don't really care about many things. As said before, we sort of want to prototype in an offline environment that's fast. We want those analytics. We want it to be as like cheap and easy as possible. This is all true. But then once we exit the pre-launch phase and we found a hit game that we want to scale from a game design point of view, then our requirements explode, as said before. And, you know, DevOps, LiveOps, we want that customer support, the localization, and more. No reason to iterate over all the things. And of course, this is not really considering the final stage, which would be us making a top grossing game. What if we enter the top 10? Then again, our design and sort of business requirements, they shoot up in complexity again. So at this point, we want to say, right, we know it's worth investing in. The game is definitely worth investing in. So let's imagine how do we build a thing that might encompass all of these requirements that we have right now and what we might want to have tomorrow. Let's fix this thing. So, and now it gets a little bit technical. I'll go through it fast. Don't worry about the details. It might look something like this, where players are coming in, millions and millions and millions of them every single day. So that's a lot of load. Let's deploy some load balancers up front, and then have something that runs our game backend code after it, so game logic. And of course, single player and multiplayer are very different things, technically speaking. So we need a way to run the multiplayer logic as well, whether multiplayer is guilds or PvP or something in between. And of course, we want to update the game over the air, so that means some kind of a content delivery network. And of course, we need to still connect to things like in-app purchase validation, push notifications, and analytics, and so on. So let's connect that. And of course, we do need that database in a sharded model so that we can scale it. And suddenly, all of this kinda starts to look like a cluster of services that we need to horizontally and vertically scale out to meet the volume. At the moment I use words like clusters, then that means we need cluster management tools to actually manage the cluster itself. And no saying human does that by hand. So then we need automation tools, CI/CD systems to actually do that for us. And of course, now that we have a cluster, we need to know what's going on with it. So that's called monitoring, to figure out CPU usages and uptimes and all that. And now that we have a game that's running inside of a cluster, we need logging tools, distributed logging tools, to figure out if the server is doing fine. And of course, we need to know what's happening in the game inside the game server. So we need that game analytics system, obviously. And did somebody mention live ops? Yeah, let's figure that one out. And so on and so forth. As a starting point, it gets complicated, but also I want to reiterate: game developers are clever, so we can build systems like these. It just takes time, and then some of it is less obvious things like regulation and security best practices and so on. Again, takes a little bit more time, and the real problem here is not that a good system is possible to build. The real problem is that if we are in this sort of firefighting mode with a live title, then I'll just like make this bold claim that the biggest, most consistent problem I see in scaling games, it's not really about the technology or the tools or the servers and so on, although that's what I'm talking about. It's about being in this mindset of scrambling around, trying to sort of keep the thing afloat while at the same time trying to re-engineer the ship of Theseus to be something that can be expanded really from a design point of view, and of course from ultimately from a business point of view, pouring in more people through ads and so on. But what we really want to do is avoid this sort of emergency mode of working. And my favorite quote of all time is probably that hope is not a plan. And in this case, if we are setting out for a new venture and we want to make a large game, and let's make a game, let's find out that it's successful, let's raise a bunch of money, let's hire a bunch of smart people, and they'll figure it out somehow. I'll just make a claim. No, nobody ever just figures it out. That doesn't happen. It's a lot of work. And the key thing here is that if you plan, it is literally 100 times cheaper to do this thing up front than do it then in the firefighting mode. And I really mean that a couple of days early spends months and months, a couple of years down the line. So that's a good ROI. How? Well, it's a large topic. Here's a couple of what I find interesting sort of tips and tricks from the field, from our customers who've been shipping games over the past 4 years. And to briefly glance over them, something that you might be able to apply immediately in your studio or in your upcoming project is number one, please let's just think about it, consider now, and implement it later. So talking about this does not mean that you have to immediately go and backlog and start coding. It just means that by the act of planning, then we understand where we're going and we can structure our own work so that we can still go and implement just the minimum thing that we need, the core loop and the analytics and so on, whatever the analog of that is for you guys. Just implement the minimal thing, but we know where this is going later and we can take now steps toward the right thing. So plan, but don't do yet. Okay. And as we're doing that, maybe the one thing that I would start doing immediately, that was actually quite surprising for me. But it turns out that with a bunch of our customers, they've said that the biggest sort of improvement that they had in their developer quality of life was to very proactively and early on in the project start customizing their over-the-air data pipeline. So game configuration. How do you, as a designer, update your game over the air? Now, it turns out those workflows are very, very game specific and studio specific. I have yet to see 2 game studios who manage their live games the same way, mostly because games are different and people are different working on those games. So let's assume that you will end up with a very bespoke system of how you go from, say, your Google Sheets, if you're using something like that to balance your game economy, into having sort of a daily workflow. This is something that will evolve as your game grows. So let's assume that that is so and start sort of living with it as early as possible, so that then when we get to the advanced global launch stage, then we are already comfortable and sort of polished in those workflows. And then we can really focus again on scaling the game from a design point of view, polishing the game, pushing out new content. And then sort of as a final thing out of these 3 is to really plan your upgrade paths. Again, this is a technology point, but things happen that we can't forecast. There's unknown unknowns. And regardless of what tech or tool we choose to use today, it's probably something very fundamental like Unity that we choose to use. But then beyond that, it's all kinds of plugins and ways of, especially in the backend side, very, very, very wide selection of different services that we need to bring together to ship a game. Let's implement all of that in a way where if we learn something 1-2 years down the line and need to switch out a service, let's make it possible to do that. Usually for clever technical people, that means putting a little bit of an adapter or a little shim between technical systems so that you can then kind of swap one out and put another one in, that we kind of make it possible in the beginning. If you do that, then you're essentially hedging your bets that, there's something that's going to happen. I don't know what. and I will be able to react to it without having to re-engineer the whole system in a very fundamental way. So it's an amazingly good escape hatch for later, without necessarily requiring a lot of upfront work. So let me give one very concrete and technical example out of all of this. Game configs, because that's what I mentioned in the middle, and personally, that's what I've been working with quite a lot. So the typical naive implementation, when I say naive, I mean like quick and dirty implementation, is that, hey, forget the game configs. Let's just like hard code stuff into the game, change the build, change the game, right? What would possibly be easier? And it is. It's very, very good for developers in the beginning. But obviously nobody does that live for the obvious reasons of it's not a game design tool. You can't really involve other people. Making builds is really slow, so that's not a way to iterate the live game, etc., etc. And most importantly, there is no migration path. So if you've ever been in the unlucky position of having to say, make a non-localized game and add localization to it, you know the pain of refactoring a hard-coded code base. It's not fun. It's not necessary. So obviously, then we can do things like, well, let's put all the game configs into a file, maybe a JSON file, upload it to a server, download that file when the game starts, and ta-da, we've got over-the-air updates. And this works. It's true. It's pretty good. It's easy to set up. It's kind of very simple technically to implement. It's a very well-known set of technologies, but then it's got some non-obvious downsides that you usually only find out when the game is actually live and like really growing up in scale, that like these problems can't manifest before that. So it's a bit of an surprising thing where, for example, JSON files, so text files, are very, very slow to parse on, especially low-end Android devices, up to the point where games just crash on the loading screen in the wild, and unless you do a lot of testing up front. And things like those text files still probably are not a game design tool, right? Like no game designer probably ever come to you and said, I really want some JSON files, man. Like that's how I want to implement my creative vision. It's not a good tool for them to do stuff. So generally that's a block later on as well. And it doesn't actually fundamentally answer any of the really difficult questions, which are something about release management, so versioning and diffing and rolling things back, or like complex features like A/B testing and all that. You still have to kind of figure those out later on. And that probably means re-engineering the system because there's no migration path. So what I would suggest you might want to do, what we do, is that we separate the data editing from the data delivery, so that designers get to use whatever tool they want. Usually it's a spreadsheet like Excel or Google Sheets or something. Then we have a discrete build step that takes in that data, validates it. So if your game config has live events that give out items as rewards, then let's also double check that those items actually exist in the game, that like the game doesn't crash if the players encounter this event or something. Let's do all of those things to make it a little bit faster. Let's do release management on the game server, and then allow the game server to kind of deliver the content in lockstep between the players, A/B tests and whatnot, kind of figure out that orchestration part. Sure. So workflows like these, they're great in the sense that they actually tick all of those feature boxes. If you remember from the beginning, that long-term idea of what we want to build over time, that does it. It's high performance, binary optimized, good. But on the other hand, it requires setup, right? So you need to have spreadsheets, you need to have a build pipeline, you need to have a game server, and all of that sounds like work. And I don't like work, so what do I do? So now, just because we've now thought about this, we've considered it, let's do something else. Let's not implement that yet. Let's do something else, something smaller that we can then migrate from. We can progressively adopt the more complex version. So in this case, let's implement the sort of the scaffolding of having this concept of over-the-air game configs in the build, but then not actually implement any of the servers or not implement fetching the configs from the web. Let's actually bundle in sort of a default config into the code. So you're back into the fastest possible. Let's just edit code, make a build, and iterate as fast as we can. And when we're ready a little bit later on, then we can start to add servers and what have you to go towards the more complicated workflow that is scalable. And so this is how you can thread the needle. And it's a very specific, very technical example, but I hope it's so specific enough to get you in the right mindset that we can now just apply this to other things as well. And so the one key, I think, takeaway and a more inspiring note that I would want to leave with you about making games that can scale is that to make something scalable, we need to make something future-proof. And happily enough, it doesn't mean that we have to be slow on doing it. It doesn't mean that we have to compromise on that fundamental need of go-to-market speed. I would argue it's not about go-to-market. It's about go to scale, time to scale instead of time to market. That's the metric to optimize for. And in that sense, it is very, very possible to not only maintain good productivity with a live game, but to increase your productivity with a live game, because that's what you want, right? You want to have a fast feedback loop of deploying updates, seeing how players react to it, and quickly modifying your own plans, and basically being in this like live iterative loop instead of going back into month and month long feature sprints. And that's the dream. That's what we're here for. So I hope that gives sort of takes you to an inspired place. And indeed, if hopefully these 3 points might give you an idea of how to approach that in your studio. Of course, there's a lot more to it. So, feel free to reach out to me or our company, because at Metaplay, sure, we do tech, but this is also what we do. So if you'd like to see the sort of tools and technologies that we're building every day to make stuff like this easier, then you're in luck, because there's nowadays a free demo of our tech as of yesterday. So you're the first people in the whole world to hear about this. It's a free demo on our website as of yesterday. Do check that out. But also, that's my email. Meet me at GDC, and probably later on in Dubrovnik at Reboot Blue, I believe. Let's see. But that's me for this morning, and let's make some games. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teemu. Especially thank you for the little sneaky heads up that we're the first people to get to see the nice new free helpful content. We appreciate that. Yeah, from my side, especially, I love so much of what you've said. I can only do a big +1 to my own personal experiences with various things, like how JSON files are not for non-technical people, and you've got to help everybody out in the system. Hope is not a plan is, I think, my favorite quote. So this is really, really wonderful. I do love that you tried to end on a positive note as well, because I'm sure there'll be people listening in who just think this all sounds so scary and I'm so scared of global launch and all the stuff I have to do. But yeah, it is a fun challenge, I think. Do you have any one
Indeed.
particular thing that's your favorite actual fun thing about this whole massive challenge?
Okay, so this gets to go into a very, very, very nerdy place immediately. But I've been actually for the past like 9 months, maybe at this point, I've spent most of my life trying to think about how to structure your game design. I mean structuring your economies, your level balancing, your tutorials, your localization, all of that. How to structure the data of your game in a way that you actually want to work with. Like when you start to go from one person to maybe 12 people working on the game design at the same time, how do we as a team productively do work? I find that interesting because I haven't seen a solution to it. So that sort of keeps on chugging along in the background. I'll tell you when I figure it out, but also
Nice.
tips
Very
welcome.
nice. Yeah, indeed. Anybody who's been listening in and wants to get in touch with Teemu, check out the website. Please go ahead after the stream. And yeah, if you've got hints and tips for that particular challenge, then yeah, sharing info is what this is all about. So perfect. I see that we've only got a minute until the stream ends, so I'm going to have to do the professional thing and wrap this up so that yeah, we can let you get on with the rest of your lovely morning, and everybody else can get some more info from more sessions. So Teemu, like, huge thanks for starting us off today. Super, super great chat with you, and we'll see you around.
Will do. Thank you all.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.